Next we have is Mr. Rajiv Chhabra, CEO Emirates of JSW MG Motor India Limited, the Indian unit of the Morris Garage brand. He is responsible for the strategic direction, performance and growth of MG brand and for driving the company's overall enterprise performance. Mr. Chhabra's expertise in the global automotive industry has been built over the last 3 decades. A change instigator, he's converted opportunities into inspiring results and energized his team to focus on the MG brand having a substantive presence in India. Under his leadership, the marquee brand has successfully introduced the Hector, its first India-centric product and the country's first internet car in the market. Mr. Chhabra has consistently delivered strong business results in every market and every business vertical he's worked in. He combines his deep experience of growing brands locally, regionally, globally, and across services industries, together with his passion for brand building. This has resulted in JSWMG's leadership in the highly competitive automotive segment. To have a detailed discussion with Mr. Chhabra on his expansion plan, I would like to invite Chirag Jain, a covering lead analyst, to have a discussion with him, along with Nirav Seth, our CEO. Over to you guys. Are we waiting for Nirav? I'll just get him. Oh, he's there.
Thank you, Mr. Chhabra. Thank you, Mr. Chhabra, for taking time out and giving us the opportunity to host you today. Apologies for the delay. We'll straight away move to the, let's say, discussion. So I think I'll start with few topics around industry, automotive industry. We have been talking about a massive inflection point in the four-wheeler industry for now several years. In fact, if I recollect, 2003, 2004, we as a market, we were about 5 lakh annually and China was about 6 lakh. Today, China upwards of 25 and we are still at about barely 4 point something. So how do you see the Indian four-wheeler market over the next, let's say, 5-7 years in terms of growth? Maybe some thoughts around that?
Right, thanks. I think this is not working. Right. Okay, hi. Yeah, hi, good morning, thanks. So, go back to the China-India thing. I remember that 84, 85 China market was smaller than Indian market, four-wheeler. And now China is 25, 26 million, we are 4 million. Coming to 2004 and 5, India Shining campaign was there, and I was in General Motors, so उस campaign को दिखा के Americans को बोला India में बहुत potential है, and काफी in multinationals most of us we have been trying to sell the potential of this country to our head offices since ages, and potential never materialized. I believe very strongly that irrespective of any government, because of our solid fundamentals of economy, which is consumption, population, 5-6% growth you can't take away from us, right? And if you look at the last 10-15 years, the industry growth is in the range of 6-7%. And if you maintain that, right now we are 4 million market, approximately, passenger cars I'm talking about. So 4 million market, so if you put 6-7% growth and GDP growth also is in that same range, it will touch 6 million by 2030, which is not small. And we will become the third largest market. China would be around 30 million, America would be around 16, 17, 18 million, and we would be 6 million. Globally, it will be 100 million market approximately, 100 plus at that point of time. So we have a strong base. 6 million is not going to be small. Even 4 million is not small. And when you talk about the players there, we can talk about that separately if you are interested. And so 4 million is a good base.
And how do you see the overall competitive landscape evolving? So we have more than, I think, almost 18, 20 brands in India, but not many are successful. Obviously, MG has been able to successfully establish themselves over the last 5 years, 5-6 years. How do you see the overall, let's say, market being dominated by, let's say, various brands?
So that's interesting. I'll give my narrative. All of you are analysts here, most of you are analysts here, so probably you know the numbers and you can slice and dice in many ways. But my perception, and I've been in the industry, I'm a Buddha, so I've been in this industry since last 30 odd years, locally and globally. So I've worked in China, Japan, Egypt, India, and because I was in GM, so I worked with Opel If some of you may recall, Opel Astra, we launched that point of time. So Opel, I used to go a lot, and then our headquarters was America, and then GM purchased Daewoo, which is Korean. So what I'm trying to boast here is that a lot of markets have the experience. Here in India, my narrative is, who are successful? Maruti, obviously, and Toyota joined hands with Maruti, right? So now they are doing the cross badging and good engineering. So that's one group, Maruti and Toyota. The second is Hyundai, pretty successful. And now Kia is their sister brand, so that's one group, Hyundai and Kia. And then you have local heavyweights, Tata and Mahindra. Who's the fifth one? Nobody, not even MG right now. So other players, who are here, including Honda, since last 20, 25 years, they're all struggling at 1%, 1.5% market share. They are not on top of the consumer mind. Whether you want to call them successful or failure, I don't know, but they are struggling at 5,000 cars a month, max. So these are the only 4 groups or players. Now coming to MG, I think we have done a great job of laying a good foundation. So MG 1.0, if I can call it, MG brand is good, our network is good, customer experience has been outstanding. We have been rated #1 by JD Power, which is gold standard in measuring the consumer satisfaction, sales and after sales. We still have our problems, but still within the game, we are #1. And we have done lots of things on other issues like gender diversity and MG Seva and all this stuff. By the way, I'm very proud to say that now we are 42% female employees in automotive sector, including manufacturing. Not white collar, I'm saying white collar, blue collar. So that was a very intentional strategy to have that kind of a thing from the day one. So the foundation is there. Now how do we scale it up? And how do we become profitable? That's the MG 2.0. And after this joint venture with JSW, that's what we are embarking on.
So can you elaborate more on this 2.0 journey vis-a-vis, let's say, 1.0 in terms of, let's say, how, let's say, our growth aspirations, ambitions, or let's say your expansion plans are for the next 5-7 years?
So this year we are going to be, and again going by my earlier explanation, if you believe that. So there are 2 players, Maruti and Toyota, 2 players, Hyundai. Though it's one group, but 2 players. Likewise, second group, Hyundai, Kia, two companies, so 4. And 6, Tata and Mahindra. We are going to be the 7th this year. We are going to beat Honda from this month onwards. And despite the fact that Honda has been here since 25 years. And then VW, Skoda, Renault, Nissan, Fiat, they are behind. So we are going to be the 7th, which is not bad considering this is only 5th year of our operations. And we have been very clear right from the day one in MG 1.0. We made 4 pillars to position our products and our brand, that we said, #1, we are going to be technology leader and innovation leader. We have been. Right from the Hector, we disrupted the, landscape. Second, we said unique customer experience. We should be #1. We have been. #3, we said diversity, gender diversity. And 4th, we said community service. Mind it, I don't want to call CSR because CSR you do, it's mandated when you're profitable. Unfortunately, we are not still profitable. So it's not CSR, it's community service. Community service and diversity, we made it a go right from the day one because if you want to attract towards the youth segment and you want to attract the good talent, young talent, you need to be relevant to various stakeholders. And youngsters want to contribute to the society in a meaningful way at a young age, unlike us. After maybe 50, we start thinking how to give back to society. But youngsters think at the age of 25 or 20, and that's why we made it relevant to the youth. Anyway, MG 2.0, we needed to have CapEx. We want to increase the capacity. Our plant can do 100,000 cars. This year, we are going to do around 75,000 cars, so you need to expand the capacity. We need to expand the portfolio. We have already announced 5 cars in the next 16 months or 18 months. And then we need to do a lot of localization. We are going to invest a lot on the new energy vehicles, especially hybrids and EVs. That's what our game is. And we have the technology, as you know, because still 49% is owned by Chinese. So we have the technology, we have the portfolio, but we want to localize everything here. Cell to battery to EDUs and other parts. And second plant, as we speak, we are investing in the second plant, so our capacity should go up to 250,000 to 300,000. So next 3 years plan is clear that we should have a second plant, increase the capacity to 2.5, 3 lakhs, have more products, fill the plant. That's what MG 2.0 looks like.
So, Rajiv, let me bring in your global perspective. You've seen some amount of tapering of EV, pure EV demand globally. China seems to be leading the way. I guess just about every second vehicle sold now is an electric vehicle. And there are obviously geopolitical risk. Is it possible from India perspective to massify electrification without gaining from Chinese ecosystem? Is that a possibility?
So I think I have a very strong opinion and conviction on this issue. I'll give you one or two data points and then we'll make the story. I was posted in China in 2011 and 12 from GM side. I was in the joint venture, GM Psych. And that point of time, they were talking about what's the China policy in 2020. Typically, our Indian approach mindset, we can't think that long, unfortunately, because of our daily struggle of roti kapda makan, daily struggle with basics. We don't think 10 years from now. In China, they were talking about it, and we used to wonder what would happen. And they were at China Policy 1.0. Since 2012 to 20, they have gone to, this is the third or fourth generation of EV technology there. Policy have made lots of changes. They've removed a lot of subsidies, but they are doing subsidy in a very different way now. So they have, and by the way, in 2002 and 3, they had started investing in minerals in Africa because of this whole EV thing. So it was a 20, 30-year story in China. India, we have woken up 2 years back, 3 years back. When in 2018, we thought about launching ZS EV, our first EV car. In true sense, that was the first EV launch in 2020. Before that, Mahindra Verito was there, but it was a fleet car, no individual car. So, and a lot of guys questioned us, why are you launching EV? So I'm 100% convinced EV is the future globally and in India. But no change movement or no movement is linear. You go through ups and downs. Direction is that, like your Sensex, your stock market. It has to keep going up. But there are bumps. So you go through that bump. Now, this reason for this bump is different in different markets. By the way, if we talk about China, EV and plug-in hybrid, which I think is a great bridging solution to EV. You may be knowing it, so I will not guess. Last month, what was the penetration in China for EV and plug-in hybrid? 50%. Okay, in Europe, it is above 15%, 16%. America, it is reaching 8-9%. India, it is 2%. Now, it's because that in most of the markets, you do not have compelling products. In India, I would argue, because Tata has got only 4 or 5 models, and that also Tata is still doing, they have done a good job, I would say, but it's still EV generation 1.0. So it's an ICE vehicle, they have put EV into that. It has certain issues. It cannot be electric-born experience in those cars. They're improving, they are getting into MG 2.0 and, EV 2.0, and I think they will keep doing a better job. But still, people feel that's what EV, you don't know what you don't know. So Indian consumers feel whatever the Tata EVs are there, that's the EV thing. But they are not the best compelling products in real sense. Likewise, the price points are not there. But the battery prices are coming down drastically. Some of you who follow this industry and EV, you couldn't have imagined prices coming below $75 per kilowatt hour. But it's there. In China, it's less than that. Till last year, we couldn't have imagined less than $100. So actually, I would argue, in the next 2-3 years, EV prices will be similar to ICE vehicles in this country. Okay, and the tipping point has to happen. So more players now coming into EV, like Hyundai is getting into it, Maruti and Toyota, Mahindra will come. So more players coming, more compelling offers coming, prices going down. That will be the tipping point, and that should happen within the next 2 years, in my opinion, 6 to 7%. I was making a joke with someone outside. In your industry, example is mutual fund. How much time it took mutual fund to take off? When individual players came in mutual fund, it didn't. When the whole industry did mutual fund sahi hai. It took, I remember Harshad Mehta talking in 80s, ek din aayega mutual fund ka. It took after that maybe 15-20 years. But mutual fund ho gaya, right? Now this SIP thing is, bacha like probably talks about SIP now, right? So likewise, EV industry, EV sahi hai, movement will happen. It's a question of 3-4 years in India.
So I'm assuming that given your conviction, which means that even at the parent company level, and you started way ahead, do you think that this is a tipping point in terms of the changing leadership? Maybe changing leadership is a hard word, but how are you positioned to take an advantage of this EV journey?
And before that, I forgot to answer your important question of supply chain thing, right? No, so let me answer supply chain. I missed that. See, in supply chain, again, if I'm the policymaker, if I'm the policymaker, and this is what I keep talking, forget about I'm GSW, MG, but if I'm a policymaker, what's good for this country? So number one, it starts with what's good for the country. Like, you want to reduce the oil import bill. You don't want to have supply chain which is dependent on China or some other countries. Like, like in US, they have got the Reduction Act, in which Inflation Reduction Act, in which they are saying they will encourage supplies from the friendly countries, which is kind of gray. It's not very easy, by the way, to follow that. So in India, I think this PLI thing, or the Made in India, Make in India, or Atmanirbharta, or whatever way you want to call it, I think is an important policy. And if I am the policymaker, I'll say, hey, what's good for this country in terms of supply chain, and for the green future, environmental issues. I reduce the import bill. It should be good for the consumer, which is cost of ownership, and then good for OEMs or players. So it's basically country, customer, and company. In that order, I think the country has to do. So if I'm the policymaker, I'll say, hey, listen, but you need to localize everything around EV, right? So cell, nobody's manufacturing, so you promote cell manufacturing. EDU is the heart of electric drive unit, is the heart of EV. Nobody manufactures in India, but they're trying to do it now. And when you say manufacture, means people are assembling it right now, but the local content actually is low. So you have to go to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, deep level localization to really make it happen. So that's what is happening. So you can say that I'm giving you a grace period of 3 years or 4 years. You localize all those things here, which is what we intend to do in GSW MG India. And if you don't do it, I'll face some trade barriers. I'll increase the import duty. And if you're importing it from anywhere, right now it's 5%, I'll make it 10%, 20%, 30%. So you make the life difficult for those guys who keep importing. But you give them grace period to localize it here. That's what government intends to do right now. So with that, I think this problem can be solved. So 3 years from now, 4 years from now, if the government is serious and makes the policy clear to people, people will go by the rule of the game. So that's what would happen. Now coming to us.
So I'll just come in again. I just want to rephrase the question that I asked you. So, when you look at the EV market globally, and if you look at the market share, they're very distributed and newcomers have come in, right? So it's inconceivable that Xiaomi launches and gets 100,000 booking, with the Sony into it.
Got it.
Right? And therefore, in that context, how these things
So in this context, let me, though I get excited and I start taking individual names, which people tell me you should not be taking, so I'll try to avoid that. But let's look at the larger picture globally. Japanese have been the slowest to react to this change. That's a fact. Why? They invested everything into hybrid, and that also mild hybrid, not plug-in hybrid. Plug-in hybrid is closer to the EV. So mild hybrid, so Prius, became a global success, especially in America and Europe and Japan. Prius never came to India. I think they launched few cars, but at that price point, nobody bought. So Toyota Prius became a gold standard for hybrid. So in general, Japanese invested a lot on the hybrid technology, and they were slow to get into the EV bandwagon. And that was true for other players also, like Honda and Mitsubishi. Nissan, under Carlos Ghosn, when they joined hands with Renault and Nissan, he was the first person to say, let's go for EV, and Nissan Leaf came, if you recall. And that was the Gen 1 EV from the Nissan side. But after Carlos Ghosn, I think that JV also is in disarray, in my opinion. So they are laggards, so Japanese. Koreans are way ahead than Japanese in general. So Hyundai and Kia, probably they have got better EVs, and probably they'll do the faster adaptation. So in India, when you come to India, and those Japanese, equivalent Japanese in India, they're still betting on CNG and mild hybrids. EV, they will have it for the namesake, but I don't think that they will have any meaningful volume game before 2028-29. So that's the time for others to take market share and disrupt. We should be one of the disruptors, I think. Even Hyundai will probably do it. And the local players, Tata and Mahindra, are betting a lot on that. So the leadership game in new energy vehicles will change. Still, you can argue, the other point is 2030, suppose you become 6 million market and or 5.5, 6 or 6.2, whatever, in the ballpark, and still you are 70% ICE. So 30% is only new energy, which is, let's say, hybrids and EVs, and 70% of 6 million still is a huge market. So there will be, ICE vehicles, and within ICE, diesel is coming down drastically. After 2027, when you have even stricter emission norms, diesel right now is only 18% of the market. Probably it will come down to 10% or 9%. So petrol is still, there's a scope for better fuel efficient powertrains on the fuel. So still, people will remain strong, but in terms of image, in terms of change, in terms of new technology leaders, Japanese will be, they have lost that 4, 5 years, 6 years, in my opinion.
Do we also see a change in terms of the body style in the four-wheeler market? Because let's say if I see Chinese market, the EV market is more dominated by small cars, which would mean, let's say, smaller batteries and much more cost competitive, unlike Western markets. So how do we see the entire SUV versus sedan or small car?
It's very interesting again. Globally, SUVs have become dominant body style, globally if you take it. And this change is happening since last 8 or 9 years. And what has happened is that people want to, sit at a higher position. There's a psychological reason for people, especially women also, like they want to sit at a higher position and should be able to look down the road. So visibility also improves, and especially in markets like India where the road conditions are not the smoothest, SUV helps you ride over those waves much better. So globally, SUV, in India also SUV is the trend, and sedans, the typical car as we knew, sedans like Ambassadors and all, they have gone down, and hatchbacks in India have been good or were good because of the 4-meter thing. As you know that GSTs, earlier excise and now GST, if you are less than 4 meter, gets the lowest amount of GST, which is 28%. And then GST goes up to 45, 46%. So that's why because of GST, you're limiting it to less than 4 meter. China, again, gives a great example of how the changes happen. Till 7, 8 years back, China, for the heck of argument, did not have a single hatchback. It was all a big car market. Big sedan, big SUVs. Because the infrastructure was good and the government did not have any discriminatory excise duty structure on the size of the car. So they were doing well. Japan, however, 1/3 of the market is small car because again, Japan government helps because of the terrain there and the less space there. They call it keiji dosha or small car, mini car. So mini car, which is less than 3 meter, gets benefit. So that's why 1/3 of the Japanese car market is small car. But China did not do any such discrimination, so it was a big car market. But on EV side, what happened, because you had to bring the cost of acquisition low, means the battery size should have been lower, the car size became smaller. So that's why small cars are doing very well in China now. Frankly, I don't know the percentage yet, but still I guess it's around 15, 16% market has become around 4 meter market, 4.2 liter. Still it's more C, as we in our terms we call it C segment, which is a hectare size segment, is doing much better. Okay. So India, small cars will keep doing well.
Okay. And how do we see the overall consumer preferences evolving in the EV versus ICE regime? Do we see a major change? I mean, obviously you did mention about body style, but what all kinds of changes can we expect?
See, again, there are a lot of myths about the EV. That EV is costly to maintain, costly to acquire, range anxiety is there, what's the true range of a battery, and the charging infrastructure, resale price of the car. There are a lot of issues and myths in consumer mind. So a lot of education needs to be done. That's why I feel the industry as a whole probably needs to provide the answer. One player or two players cannot provide the answers, again, like your mutual fund thing. But the thing is, let me give you an example, and this is interesting. Right now, the market share is 2% for EV. It means out of 100 customers, let's say, sitting here, only 2 of you are going to buy EV. But 5 or 6 of you, I think, have been thinking about EV, but you haven't got the right answers or the right product or the right education. So if suppose we are able to provide that, this 2% can become 5 or 6%. I'm not saying our job is to convert 100% of you into EV tomorrow. But 4, 5 of you can be converted. And that depends again on the offering. Let me give you another example. You know, so as an example, ZS EV, which is, I would say, probably the best EV in the segments, our EV. So our babies obviously have to love my baby, especially in front of others. So take it in that spirit. ZS EV, suppose it is 20 lakhs of rupees, right? And you're buying a Hyundai Creta or Kia Seltos for about 16 lakhs of rupees. Let's say it's a like-to-like price. 16 lakhs is ex-showroom price, as an example you take for Creta, and ours is 20 lakhs. So when you buy a Creta for 16 lakhs, then you put petrol into that. So a petrol, let's say you drive it for 1,000 kilometers a month, approximately. 1,000 kilometers a month means 100 liters of petrol. 100 liters of petrol means 10,000 rupees of petrol, right? Approximately, bada bada. So then you are buying a car for 15 lakhs or 16 lakhs, ex-showroom price, not on-road price. On-road price is huge. And then you are putting 10,000 rupees of petrol. Now ZS EV, if I say, as an example, it costs you 15 lakhs, same as Creta. And your 5 lakh hai battery ka, it is 10,000 rupees per month petrol charge, equivalent. So then you start saying, hey, ZS EV also is 15 lakh ki gaadi, not 20 lakh ki gaadi. You know, so that's because battery ka EMI is equivalent to your petrol charge, as an example. But then there are other issues. Ki iski resale price kya hogi? Because another thing is, and rightly so, the doubt in people's mind is that battery ka prices are coming down, so resale price ZS EV ka kya hoga, ya EV ka kya hoga? That's a genuine question. You know, battery ki life. You know, and people start talking about battery. What's the battery's life? You know, suppose as a second life, third life. So a lot of work is going on. In fact, we are also doing a lot of work. In fact, we are, by the way, just to tell you that a good battery life typically outlives the life of a car. So people don't have to bother about the battery. And then we have second life battery. We have done lots of projects now, and there are a lot of startups like Loham and all in this space where we are saying it can be used as a stationary battery. The battery can be used as a stationary storage device. And we have made some batteries now which are actually powering schools and even police stations in UP and Uttarakhand. So we are giving that as a project. You know, we are working with TERI and these institutes. Also, there are recovery, chemical recovery plants that in the end of it, even after second life, suppose you have to recover the materials from there, 99% of recovery we have done all of metals. So still, at that age, still the battery can fetch you 30,000-40,000 rupees after 15-16 years of life. 30,000-40,000 rupees scrap value is not much, but you recover 99% of your metals from there. So there is a second life, third life battery. A lot of work is going on globally as well as in India, and we are in the forefront.
So, Rajiv, this new EV policy that came around, at least from the outside, it seemed to be pretty exciting because, you're allowing imports at 15% duties with some commitment. It doesn't seem to be taking off. So, what are the hiccups?
You're right. We are also not looking at that because still the details are not yet out. And it was presumably done because of one car manufacturer in mind, that maybe that car manufacturer, which will be a trophy victory for us, would happen. Didn't happen. Others, again, you import some cars. Unfortunately, in our country, the thing is when you make a policy, the first question probably you ask is how people can misuse that policy, so you have 100-page policy, right? Rather than making one-page policy saying that if exceptions happen, we'll deal with that. So many things. So people say, hey, listen, if I import this car, do I have to localize this car only, or I can localize some other car? Time period, this and that, how does it work, overall things. So the details are not yet out. And on the other hand, if you talk about EV, the PLI scheme, which was straightforward, that, okay, you add domestic value 50% and then you can get 10%, 12% in incentive. So people are working on that. We are also working on that. And so the rules of that PLI thing are much more straightforward, I think. You're saying you import some cars at less duty, subject to more localization and investment. Details are convoluted yet, so not clear. So that's why maybe it's not picking up.
Okay.
How do you see the support of government in terms of driving this entire electrification theme? As of now, we have largely, let's say, low GST and probably road tax waiver, at least in the four-wheeler space, barring the fleet operator segment. Do you think that's very important to continue?
Yeah, for any change management, is I think initially you have to handhold. And again, why change management? Because EV is good for the environment ultimately, it's good for the consumer, good for the it's climate, and that's the whole underlying factor. And that's why if you look at globally, every country has given the support. The question is how long you want to give the support. So here our view is that for any policy matter, for that matter, in any industry, I think it has to be a long term, especially in auto. It's so complicated. You need to have some stability and some long-term outlook to the policy making. So we are saying that right now so in terms of benefit, as you know, if I can summarize, you get GST benefit, which is 5%, which is the number one benefit. Then FAME 2 scheme was there in some avatar. FAME 3 may come now, but that only was for commercial vehicles for four-wheelers. Means if the price of the car is less than 15 lakhs and you localize certain components, you can get a benefit of up to 2 lakhs rupees per car. And Tata got benefit. Tata was the only company which benefited because they were selling Tata Tigor as fleet car, but the government stopped that. And maybe FAME 3 they will come. So if you have that kind of a fleet thing in your business case, then maybe that matters. For people like us, it didn't matter. And typically we don't keep any incentive as part of our business case. That whatever incentive you can get, it's a plus. And the third thing is the road tax waiver in certain states. Now that's a state subject. So let's say around 40-50% states have made EV road tax as zero in certain states, but other states take it as par with other ICE vehicles. And that state subject or that state ruling, frankly, you don't know it will last till next month or next year or 2 years. So road tax again probably is a variable. So for us, I think GST is the big one. We can't depend on FAME 2, FAME 3 or the road tax thing. Though our request would be if government wants to encourage electrification, they should give this incentive of road tax. A state government should do it. Now coming to GST part. Now GST is very important thing. So our viewpoint is till this change happens, till market penetration goes up to 14%, 15%, 20%, you should keep this. After that, and that probably will happen in 6 years' time, 7 years' time, industry has got sufficient time to do localization, reduce the material cost, and then don't depend on this GST benefit. So if that's the kind of a roadmap, if government can make it clear and announce it, that is beneficial for all of us. So suppose they say GST will become 12% after 4 years. Okay, we know the rule. We'll play as per that rule.
Okay, just last question from my end, and then probably we'll open the floor for questions from audience. What do you make of the current scenario in the auto industry? I mean, inventory seems to be quite high, almost 60 days plus.
Yeah, so that's a short-term thing, right? That's another blip we have hit. So typically, April, May, June is the weakest quarter, is the dullest quarter, seasonality-wise. So that played the role. Then elections were happening, so due to whatever reasons, people don't buy cars during that time, so that added to it. And then also, extreme heat and extreme weather conditions, unless you were desperate for a car, people said, let's postpone it by 2-3 cars. Especially if you are going to replace your car, who would go in extreme heat or extreme rains to change the car if you can wait for another 2-3 months? So these were the reasons or excuses, Then on the competition side or the manufacturer side, every manufacturer gave a huge target. And there was no bookings left or latent demand left or post-COVID shortages left. So it was cutthroat cut, usual auto industry. And as the luck would have been, unfortunately, we still measure the industry in wholesale terms, which is how many cars I have billed to the dealer, which is not real retail. And now, if I have to show the growth to my headquarters or to the stock market, I'll keep billing the cars to the dealers. So the stock has gone up, right? So stock has gone up, and you're right now it's averaging 60, 75 days in the industry, which should not be the case. Everybody feels that we should learn from these mistakes and should correct ourselves, like the shipping capacity and the rate has gone up, more ships you order and then it crashes, right? Likewise, here it's happening. So it's a very temporary thing. From August onwards, the industry mood changes, more people start coming and the festivities start. So I think in the next 2-3 months, it should get corrected. But in the short run, yes, dealers are the worst hit, unfortunately.
Okay. In the interest of time, we may take 1 or 2 questions from the audience.
Rajiv, thanks so much. The question is, the joint venture JSW with MG, what are the contours of this understanding? I mean, what value does JSW add to this joint venture to the entire product pipeline, the technology, a lot of the critical stuff, batteries, etc., is all sourced by MG. So how does this work? I haven't seen a template like this work where market access is probably the only thing that I understand that JSW provides. And just love your thoughts on that.
To be honest, it starts the geopolitical thing, hedging that geopolitical thing. To start it with that. Fortunately for us, Mr. Jindal personally is very excited and aspirational about the auto segment, so auto industry as such. So that adds colors to this whole joint venture. The main value addition and future wealth creation, from my perspective, is going to be their relentless focus on the cost and localization. So I think that's the dimension they bring to this joint venture of localizing, and reducing the material cost. And in that reduction of material cost, it means finding some strategic supplier in India who probably will help us in localizing and making sure that we are supply chain, we insulate ourselves from supply chain risk, as you indicated. So that's what it is. Second, in terms of integration, vertical integration, in terms of backward and forward integrations, as an example, when we talk about the cell, so somebody has to do the cell manufacturing. As a car manufacturer, probably we cannot do it ourselves, but JSW can do it. So through JSW, other ventures or the same venture, they will get into cell manufacturing. We are talking about some other strategic parts. Can we use JSW Group's energy and do it? In logistics, can we do it? If we still import a lot of stuff, so JSW Logistics can help in terms of reducing the logistic cost. So various arms of the cost get answered by JSW in a big way. Even steel, for that matter, like cement for our construction work. So there are a lot of synergies from that perspective. So everything is not really written on a piece of paper, how much it will add to it. But from SAIC perspective, I think they bring local knowledge, cost focus, localization, and the cost reduction in some other allied areas. This is what they bring. And SAIC brings products and technology and the brand.
Right. And is domestic R&D going to be a plan?
I'm sorry?
Domestic R&D, is that going to be part of the plan?
100%, absolutely. Because when you localize, certain things, you need to have very strong engineering and R&D. And R&D, some of you probably have seen the cycle of, let's say, Suzuki and Hyundai, Suzuki, Maruti, they also took some time to start localizing in a real way here. But their time was different. Even suppliers' capability was not there. We have come at an age where Indian suppliers are relatively well established locally as well as globally, and engineering, a lot of engineering work also has happened. And Mahindra and Tata also have taken it to the next level now. So that way we are fortunate. So local engineering center, local R&D center, doing some facelifts, doing accessories is the low-hanging fruit starting point.
Hi, the question I had was with respect to the EV experience. China, as you said, 50% is now EV and hybrids combined. The US EV is actually going down, and people are actually questioning whether California can get to 100% EV by 2030. Seems to be a distant dream now. So where do you see India in its evolution of adaptation of EVs? Do you see it going the China way or European and the US way?
So Europe is in between China and US right now. And by the way, US also, if you look at the US headline, obviously is EVs going down. But if you look at it with respect to what? See, US, if you look at it, it's a SUV primarily market, big size truck. There are not very compelling products in the range of $30,000 and $40,000 SUVs. The top end SUVs are coming at $100,000. Now, what's the market size for $100,000 in the US? Very less, and that's why it reflects into EV market share. But I'll bet that if you get $30,000, $40,000 a good pickup truck, which Chinese can do, by the way, that's a different story, that they will not be allowed to go to a US that way easily. And so the moment anybody is able to crack that, you will see the conversion of EV market there. in China also, in Europe, as you're saying, VW is getting into it, Renault and Nissan, Renault and Peugeot and PSA are getting into it. See, one thing, the elephant in the room is the China cost model. You know, if assuming there is no geopolitical issue globally, and people are not putting constraint for China, China would be ruling all over the globe on new energy vehicles. That's a fact. Now, because people are going to put constraints to China in terms of indirect and direct trade barriers, so most of these manufacturers are going to have some kind of tie-ups with China and beat the barriers indirectly. Because you need to meet that cost. And the China cost, all the processing of all the big materials happen in China, they're the leaders. Battery capacity, they're the leaders. Capacity utilization is not happening, that's why the cost has gone down in general. And this scene will continue for the next few years. So, you name any big player. By the way, VWs of this world and GMs of this world, they are tying up with Chinese technology right now. And when the China plant capacity is not there, they'll start exporting from China factories to their other plants, which they were doing it, by the way. Right? So all the big groups are, including some of the Indian top groups, and I'll not name it and keep it confidential, but I know everybody is talking to Chinese players for some kind of technology collaboration or the other. All the top players in this country too.
You don't see power, electricity being a constraint for EV penetration?
See, when India made it very clear that they have to reduce the emission intensity of our GDP. That's very clear, and that's the right direction. And they said that installed capacity of renewal should be 50% by year 2030, and I read it that actually we installed capacity. We are already 50%. And the carbon sink, you have to increase by 2 times, 3 times. You know, so those are the broad goals of Indian government. And again, irrespective of who is in the government, probably has to do it for the environmental thing and 2070 goals and stuff like that. So when you follow this, installed capacity is getting increased in a big way. Though for our GDP, still the coal will be important. Coal would be there. It's not that coal is going to go down. So coal will go up, other things will go up, but after 10, 15 years, the renewables probably will start contributing more to the grid. Right now, there are grid balancing issues also. So all this is part of change management. It's happening. We are only at 2%. Just imagine 4 years back, the kind of debate you are having or discussions we are having right now, we didn't have even 5% of it 4 years back. The very fact that we are talking about EV now with only 2% market share is an indication that change management is happening.
Thank you.
Between hydrogen and EV, again, there's a debate, right? I mean, you have hydrogen technologies also are becoming successful. The only thing is the argument is that the infrastructure is not there. But in India also, some commercial vehicles are operating. In US, hydrogen is becoming. So what's your take 5-10 years down the line?
I think
as hydrogen becomes more
than infrastructure is the commercialization and the cost issue of hydrogen. So for the big trucks and all, this is kind of getting acceptable, the technology at that cost level. Still, there's a long way to go, even on the commercial vehicles. But for the car, it's a distant dream as far as I'm concerned. Since last 20 years, hydrogen in the cars, we have been talking about it. We also have made cars. SAIC has got cars. In my previous company, GM, we had cars. Mirai Toyota has got car. But these are all pilots. I think my personal view would be hydrogen in the cars is 10-15 years away at least. And trucks, it will happen. Like SAIC also has got more than 2,000 trucks running in a particular corridor from ship to from port to a particular location in Shanghai. So on the truck side, it will happen faster. Cars, long way.
Cars, for what would be the tipping point? Like sometimes technology, we don't realize how fast they can happen. So if the infrastructure gets built, then what would be the constraint?
Yeah, you are right. So I don't know what I don't know on this issue, but my personal bet would be minimum 10 years.
Yeah. So in the interest of time, we won't be able to take more questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Chhabra, for taking time out and sharing all the insights on the global automotive industry.
the highly competitive automotive segment. To have a detailed discussion with Mr. Chhabha on his expansion plan, I would like to invite Chirag Jain, our covering lead analyst, to have a discussion with him along with Nirav Seth, our CEO. Over to you guys.